So my name is Cecilia Chou, and I'm a second-year medical student. To begin with, what makes active learning sessions most valuable is the fact that it's extra time to confront something that we've already learned, but possibly have not actually retained in our memory, and to call it to memory. And I think in the process of doing that, it becomes something that we remember much better than if we read it from a textbook or from a lecture. So what would make active learning sessions more helpful is broadly anything that engages every individual student to call something to mind that they didn't know. Most people who come to learning sessions aren't 100% prepared, that's why they're there. But it can be hard when questions are asked at the entire class because the people who answer are the ones who are either more comfortable answering without being right or the ones who know what the right answer is. And so then the majority of the class, I think, and from personal experience, doesn't get the opportunity to think about something they don't know and come to the conclusion about the answer in their own time. And I think so broadly the questions, lecture style sessions or ones where everybody is asked the same question and wait for an answer, those are the least valuable. In thinking about what I might change about learning sessions to make them more valuable, I probably would refer back to the ones that I've really enjoyed and what those facilitators used. So as I mentioned earlier, anything that engages the individual student, so anything that breaks it down into as small a group as possible. Examples of that are doing personal worksheets where you answer problems by yourself before coming together to work with your table. That's one. I've been to a session that encouraged everyone at the small table to break into pairs, and you worked with the person sitting next to you before you then discussed as a group. I found that to be very helpful as well because then you're more likely to be forced to think about it. The bigger of a group you are, the less responsible you are for doing your own thinking. So if you're doing worksheets or working in pairs or even working in a small group is better than working at your table is better than answering as an entire class. I think content-wise, the thing that makes sessions least valuable is when the content doesn't reflect and build on what we've learned in a specific lecture. If it's too broad, then it feels too overwhelming and it doesn't, I think, give that opportunity to take something that we read directly and then think about it and then kind of spit it back and think about what the right answer is. But if there are too many right answers or too many ways that it could go, then it becomes less effective. And thinking of one recently that we had, I think it's also, or some other sessions that we've had, what can make it less valuable is when there's no order in the way that tables are expected to answer questions. So after every question, it's just, okay, who has the answer? And then it's again waiting for somebody to raise their hand. I've been in a couple sessions of yours actually, where you make it very clear that you're following an order and asking the tables to answer a question. And so it's very kind of safe feeling in that sense. Like, I know I'm not responsible for this one, but I still need to pay attention because maybe I'll be referencing it by the time the question comes to our table. But then everyone's expected to answer. Whereas when it's a huge group and we've either been in big mandatory active learning sessions or ones where there are still a lot of tables and there doesn't seem to be an order in the way we're expected to answer, it can feel still like you're not being forced to engage. And I think that's what makes the learning session most valuable is when you are held responsible for thinking about what the questions that are being asked. My thoughts about mandatory versus non-mandatory sessions, I think that if they're mandatory, it can be very helpful, but then it has to be guaranteed that it's going to be very helpful. We recently had a mandatory session where the information introduced was different from the prep material and it wasn't very related to the other things that we were learning for the exam, and it felt very ineffective. And that was disappointing because I think that there's a lot of benefit that comes from the learning sessions, and there's a lot of benefit from having everyone there and having a bigger group, but when it's not used effectively, it just turns into more of a lecture style type thing, and you're just sitting there waiting for the session to end. So I don't have a problem with having mandatory ones, but I think they really have to be sure that the lecturer, if they are guest faculty, has really worked on and gone through with other lecturers who commonly do very successful learning sessions and kind of received feedback and gone that way. Some thoughts that I might give to a new faculty member who hasn't done active learning sessions, first of all, is to look at recordings or listen to recordings of previous successful ones and really just pay attention to what has been done. I don't think that active learning sessions need to be particularly novel in the way that they're done. There are a couple good ways that everyone agrees are very helpful, anything that breaks it down for the student and forces the student to think. And so I think looking at those, and it's okay to copy what other people have done. There's no need to make it new or something that students haven't seen. So the other piece of advice I might give to a faculty member who's doing a new active learning session is to remember that active learning really is very different from giving a lecture. And you're assuming that students have already had a first pass, hopefully, at the material that you've presented. And then it's coming up with different ways to force them to recall that to mind. I think that's at the heart of it what active learning is you're taking something that you've just read in passing and you need to somehow integrate it into something that you know. And so you have to connect it with maybe things that you already know, and then you have to work out a problem and go through that process of thinking it through, and then it becomes something that's yours. And so the process of doing that is much different than just saying things as a student. It's, like I've mentioned earlier, either doing worksheet problems or forcing every student to think about something they don't know and figure it out, work in small groups, work in pairs. And another thing that I've enjoyed, I think, I received a really good piece of advice from another medical student once who said that if you don't know the answer to a question, you should still pick one and be confident that this is the right one. And you should really believe in that and think through why you think this is it. And when you find out that if you're wrong, then you really remember that thought process that you went through and saying, well, I think this is the right answer, and then somebody else explains to you that it's the wrong answer. And the reason why I bring that up is because Dr. Stanley, both of the Dr. Stanleys, when they do their sessions, they've done formats where they give every table colored cards, and you have to pick up a colored card at the right time to signify your answer. And that, I think, in a sense, really forces you to pick an answer and to have thought through why you think it's right, and then you have to put it out there with kind of the embarrassment or like the being apprehensive that maybe other people will pick a color that's different from you. But I think part of learning that way is defending your answer and putting up your color, and even though it's wrong, then you remember more clearly, I missed that question and this is why. And I think that's something that's very valuable as well.